Everyone says the same thing right now. AI is replacing software engineers. You see headlines everywhere, layoffs in tech, thousands of engineers are leaving companies like Meta, Google, Amazon. And the explanation that everyone repeats is very simple. AI makes engineers more productive, so companies need fewer engineers. Sounds logical, but there is a small problem with this story. It's mostly wrong. The layoffs happening in tech right now are not primarily caused by AI. And if we want to understand how AI will actually affect software engineers, we first need to understand what is really happening inside the industry, because the real story is much more interesting and much more complicated. Let's start with the obvious question: why are tech companies laying off engineers? There are three major reasons, and AI is not one of them. Reason 1: the macroeconomic environment. We are currently living through a very unusual global situation. Two major wars are happening close to Europe, one in Ukraine, one in the Middle East. At the same time, interest rates are much higher than they were a few years ago. During the COVID years, money was almost free. Interest rates were close to zero. Investors were aggressively funding technology companies, and tech companies hired people like crazy. Why? Because investors believed the digital economy would grow exponentially. People were working, buying, and learning online. Entertainment was and is online, so companies hired for a future that looked like permanent hypergrowth. In fact, let me be a bit cynical. I think the headcount target is one of the KPIs for senior leads without a product strategy or vision. We hired shit ton of folks without knowing how to utilize them. When we run out of money, we swap the KPI to the headcount reduction. Senior leads always have something to do. Nice. But then reality changed. Interest rates increased and investors suddenly cared about profitability again. And when capital becomes expensive, something else becomes expensive too, the headcount. So companies started cutting, and not because AI replaced engineers, but because the economic environment changed. Reason 2: many products are already mature. The second reason is even more interesting. Many large tech products are already feature complete. Take Facebook as an example. I have been using Facebook for maybe 10 or 15 years, and honestly, the product is almost the same. You open the app, scroll, and see what your friends posted. That's basically it. Yes, there are small changes here and there, but there are very few revolutionary features. The same is true for Instagram, WhatsApp, and many other products. These platforms are extremely mature, which means the engineering work changes. Instead of building new systems, engineers are mostly maintaining systems, fixing bugs, improving reliability, and making small incremental improvements. And mature systems simply require fewer engineers than rapidly growing products. So the demand for engineering labor decreases naturally. Reason 3: the pandemic hiring bubble. The third reason is a classic market correction. During COVID, companies massively overhired. They expected digital activity to keep growing forever, but when the pandemic ended, the growth slowed down. So companies suddenly had more engineers than necessary, and when investors demand efficiency, companies reduce their workforce. Again, this is not AI replacing engineers. This is the tech industry correcting a hiring bubble. Now let's talk about AI, because AI is clearly powerful, but here is a side question I would like briefly to discuss. Is AI actually a competitive advantage? Most people assume the answer is yes, but if you think about it carefully, the answer is probably no, because a real competitive advantage is something your competitors cannot easily copy. Examples of real competitive advantages include exclusive data, network effects, regulatory barriers, or unique technology. AI tools today are not like that, because everyone can use them. ChatGPT, Copilot, Claude, Cursor, open source models, and so on. They're available to almost everyone, which means the competitive advantage, if it exists, will only be temporary. Let me give you a personal example: the Berlin City Guide story. Around 2009, I worked as a Berlin City Guide. I had a website where tourists could request private city tours. The website generated leads. Customers sent emails asking if I was available. So the business process looked like this. A customer sends an email. Later in the day, I respond. Then the customer confirms the booking. Very simple. But in 2009, something interesting happened. The first iPhones with mobile internet appeared. I bought an iPhone 3G, and suddenly I had a Gmail on my phone. That completely changed my workflow. Instead of checking emails only in the evening, I could see incoming requests immediately. So I started doing something clever. During the tour, there are always small breaks. Tourists stop to take pictures near Brandenburg Gate, or they walk through the Holocaust Memorial for a few minutes. So, while they were walking around and exploring, I quickly checked my phone. If a new email request arrived, I responded immediately using a template. It took maybe 2 minutes. By the time I finished the city tour, I had already sold the next tours. Meanwhile, other city guides were doing the traditional workflow. They finished the tour, went home, had lunch, opened their laptop, and finally responded to emails around 7 or 8 p.m. But the customer had already booked with me at 11 a.m. That was a real competitive advantage. Not because smartphones were magical, but because I adopted the technology earlier. But the interesting part is what happened next. 2 years later, every city guide had a smartphone. Everyone responded immediately, and the advantage disappeared. AI today looks very similar. Right now, some companies adopt it quickly. Others are slower, so early adopters may gain temporary productivity advantages. But in a few years, everyone will have access to the same tools. And when everyone has the same tool, it stops being a competitive advantage. So now let's come back to the productivity discussion. Everyone says AI makes engineers more productive, and that is absolutely true. But I think there is an important distinction that almost nobody talks about. There are two completely different types of productivity: personal productivity and system productivity. Personal productivity is simple: how fast an individual engineer can complete a task. For example, imagine an engineer updating documentation across a large code base. Before AI, they would read the code changes, understand the differences, and write documentation. That might take 5 or 6 hours, but today, AI tools can analyze the code differences, generate explanations, and draft documentation. So the same task might take an hour. That's easily a 5x productivity improvement. But now we have to ask a difficult question: what happens to the extra 5 hours? There is an extra time problem, and there are several possibilities. The engineer might immediately pick another task from the backlog. In that case, productivity really increases. But something else might happen. Maybe the engineer simply works slower, or spends more time in meetings, or in Slack discussions, or doing something else. Especially in remote work environment. I am not blaming anyone here. The point is not about individual discipline. The point is about process design, because most companies still estimate work exactly as they did before AI existed. Tasks are estimated in hours or days, but those estimations assume old productivity levels. Now engineers work faster, but the system still operates the old expectations. So the productivity gain never reaches the organization. Let me give you a concrete example. In large tech companies, engineers write performance reviews twice per year. Self-evaluations, peer feedback, manager evaluations. Traditionally, people spend days writing these documents, but with AI tools, the workflow becomes very different. I personally do something simple. I write a very short bullet point about the engineer. Then I provide the AI system with 2 documents: the job expectations and the company leadership principles. Then I ask the AI to generate a structured evaluation. It produces a complete draft in seconds. I spend maybe 5 minutes editing it. So instead of spending half an hour or more on each review, I spend about 10 minutes. That's easily a 3x productivity improvement. But something strange happens. Many engineers still spend days writing reviews, even though the tools exist. Why? Well, I think because the process has not changed, habits have not changed, expectations have not changed, which leads to an important conclusion. AI improves individuals first, organizations improve much slower. And this leads to the final and most important point. We are missing something fundamental. We are missing AI engineering best practices. To understand this, we need to go back in time, about 15 or 20 years. In the early 2000s, software engineering was also chaotic. Web development exploded and distributed systems became common. Systems became much more complex. Engineers struggled with basic questions. How should we structure the code? How should we design services? How should we build scalable systems? Then something important happened. The industry created shared knowledge. Books like Design Patterns, Clean Code by Uncle Bob, Effective Java, Architectural Patterns for Scalable System. These resources created shared engineering standards. If you hired a good engineer, they already knew these principles. They knew how to structure code. They knew how to review pull requests. They knew how to design systems. And that made teams dramatically more productive. With AI tools, we are back in the Wild West. Engineers use all the fancy new tools a bit chaotically, and there is no agreement about how to use them. We don't know how to review AI-generated code, how to validate AI-generated architectures, and how to detect hallucinated logic. Whether software architecture itself should change because of AI. Are we just building the same systems faster, or are we about to see a new paradigm shift? Just like when we moved from procedural programming to object-oriented programming, or from monolith to microservices. I feel like we simply don't know yet. In health engineering organizations, quality is enforced by process. For example, you cannot merge a pull request without tests. CI pipelines enforce quality. Static analysis tools enforce standards. Now imagine the same thing for AI. How do we enforce quality when AI generates code? What should be the rules? Should we require automated verification? AI-generated test coverage? Architecture validation tools? The industry hasn't answered these questions yet. And that brings us to a real conclusion. AI will not replace software engineers overnight, but it will force the industry to reinvent how software engineering works. The companies that succeed will not be the ones that simply use AI tools. They will be the ones that redesign the engineering processes. Because the real competitive advantage will not be AI itself, it will be knowing how to use AI properly. So, will AI replace software engineers? Probably not in the way you think. AI will not suddenly eliminate the need for engineers, but it will change how engineering organizations operate. Just like the early web era forced us to invent design patterns. Just like the cloud era forced us to invent microservices, the AI era will force us to invent new engineering practices. And the companies that figure those out first will build software faster. Because in the end, the real revolution is not the tool. The real revolution is how humans organize around tool. And that story is only the beginning. So if you like the video, leave your comments in the comments, and see you next time.